Hello, my name is Jessica Roelofs. The works I've been creating the last few months are probably my most autobiographical. This was unintentional, as the last few years I've been focused on investigating emotional and psychological landscapes surrounding relationships and choices. However, it was a logical progression to go from thinking of emotional experiences in an abstract way to working from a more personal place. To me, I'm still studying these internal experiences in a general and social sense, but as I work on this subject, it is becoming more and more grounded in the solid foundation of my own life and understanding that I've gained from that. This practice-led study began during my second year at James Cook University, where I studied a Bachelor of Creative Industries. I began to research the subject of love and fear as binary motives for most of our personal choices, especially in social and relational contexts. This is still present in my work, but I'm looking at emotions surrounding connection and disconnection, particularly in this body of work. I work in a very unplanned way at the moment. I pin my paper to the wall, think about what I want to say with my work, and sort through the ideas that spring to my mind to find something good. The images that pop into my head are usually inspired by memories, emotional or psychological experiences. Lately, even childhood stories that I read many years ago. I like to use realistic or semi-realistic scenes to deconstruct internal narratives or the stuff that goes on inside of us when we're experiencing the things I discussed before, such as the emotional journey of connection or disconnection and the internal fight, if you like, between love and fear. The image that I can create can also play a second part as the indication of the outward consequences of the inward narrative. I'm also influenced by surrealism in some ways, especially René Magritte, who used realistic scenes to refer to internal or dream experiences. I focus on these concepts because I believe that the relationships we build with others and our social outlook is a huge part of how the world works.
My name is Serena Kuring and I'm studying a PhD in creative arts. My research title is Revealing Synesthesia Through Creative Arts Practice. So what this means is I am a practice-led researcher who creates visual artifacts to communicate my research. And for those of you who are not familiar with synesthesia, it's a neuroscientific condition that affects about 5% of the population and causes people to simultaneously experience a coupling of the senses. So for example, a person may hear what they see as sounds, or even upon seeing a particular colour or shape, their brain may automatically trigger them to taste bitterness. Besides experiencing synesthesia myself, I find it particularly interesting because it highlights how differently people experience the world and shows a very different way of perceiving. In fact, because synesthesia occurs in parts of the brain that influence sensory perception, it causes one to question what really is reality and how can we be sure that our reality is objective. The works I have created for this exhibition aim to communicate my experience of seeing what I hear. They are evolved from a recent body of work that was exhibited at Kick Arts in November 2016 titled Sounding Out. The works featured at the Tableland's regional gallery are zoomed in macro details of smaller aspects from the works that were exhibited in 2016. The materials I have used are mostly ink and polymer on paper. Their aim was to try and show the viewer what music looks like to me in my mind's eye. I use a lot of repetition and pattern to communicate rhythm, tempo and volume, and particular notes are accented through the work using visual representations such as the red rectangles, for example. For me, these works can actually be heard, and each element of the drawing renders a sound, and perhaps they all are individual notes that come together to produce an overall sound or music, if you will. But of course, the work is not supposed to be read literally. It's just a glimpse of what music looks like to me.
These works explore the complex nature of space and how we interact with our environment. When thinking of the Tablelands area and how to define this landscape, I started to paint some iconic landmark buildings that represent our community on many levels: the cultural history, agriculture and industry, and how we control space. I also wanted to find a way to portray this narrative by painting the buildings in the landscape and then superimposing pattern to represent a metaphor for control. The patterns that developed bear a relationship to mapping, as well as they are reminiscent of the unseen digital world. I then started to look at the landscape from Google Earth. Interestingly, from 20,000 feet above the Earth, human marks become abstracted, and there is a definite divide between natural and man-made, which becomes clear. The irony is Lake Tinaroo appears completely organic, and yet we know it's man-made. Then by deconstructing and simplifying the environment, this allows us to see clearly our influence, and yet it is incredibly beautiful as well in its own natural pattern work. The forms from cropping, paddocks and centre pivot irrigation make for interesting design for these images. I wanted to use mapping to understand the environment and as a point of reference for this exhibition. I spend many hours in the landscape on my horse, which gives me a multi-sensory experience of smells, sounds and views which are embedded memory that lays down an emotional map within. I try to recreate through my images a sense of the landscape and how important our association with it is for our collective well-being. I have a soft spot for brolgas from my childhood growing up near a large brolga colony. The brolga painting is a map that references habitat control. These birds move around the area which they are predestined to exist in. They of course adapt like all animals, but their large frames are hindered by fences, which can become traps. Using cartography to highlight another form of control that we have over the natural landscape. In painting the Atherton maize silos, because it was such an iconic industrial building for the area, I tried to be mindful of respecting this building and how the stories that it held within the hearts of this community. Without any idea how it would develop, it rose from the dark canvas like a sort of ghostly reminder of past history. It is a strikingly beautiful, industrial and majestic form, and I think worthy of remembering. I wanted these works to grow from a real and living history into a simplification of landscape and culture so we can see the divide and also the beauty that is all around us. We may ask, by looking at this uncomfortable relationship, do we as the controller have an opportunity to pursue equilibrium for future coexistence and posterity?